everyone. Today we have our another new episodes, and because of this episode's huge popularities, we are doing our third episode governing the metaverse, especially the youth communities, those who want to develop startup and those who want to develop a knowledge-based communities from Asia Pacific. They are really interested to know more about governing the metaverse and how does it work. So we have our world famous speaker, Mr. Marshall, Mr. Eric. Professor David Smith, Mr. Patrick, uh, Professor Rob, Mr. Philippi, Mr. Jason, David Jekali, and Mr. Dan. So thank you everyone for joining today's session. First, I would like to give chance, Mr. Marshall.
Well, am I on? Yes. Okay. So it's good to be back. So obviously, the metaverse is a combination of a virtual reality and augmented reality, and it's the technology that's taking the youth by storm, and maybe old people like me by storm as well. But basically, it can be used for many reasons and purposes, from medical purposes to sustainable technology, and also places where one might consider be operating in a very dangerous environment. So it can be such as mining, underground mining, and undersea opportunities as well. And from my perspective, because I'm coming from the sustainable technology area for climate restoration, climate repair, it's obviously technology that can be utilized and advanced for those purposes as well. And I'll leave it at that, and I'll let it go to the rest of the panel that are much more expert than I am in this topic.
Thank you, Mr. Eric.
Well, the big thing about the metaverse is just how easy it is to start anything. I mean, if you think about starting a company, starting a club, starting a social media platform, it's even more difficult than what things are coming now. Not only can you create whole worlds, you can create games. As this gets easier and easier, there are more people creating their own environments. The challenge with that is, as soon as somebody creates an environment, everybody wants more control, more power. And so you see that happen in government. You see that the blockchains are a good example of that. You create a block because everybody wants to collaborate and be fair and work together. And then people use various ways to essentially control that block or control that organization. So I think our biggest challenge right now, technically, it's creating all the tools and systems to make it easy to connect with people and create your own metaverses within the metaverse, and even metaverses on top of metaverse. But the big challenge is simply this: how do you fairly allow people to control? And I'll just use one example that's happening right now. Right now, there's a lot of contention about politics in the state of Texas. Well, it turns out that several millionaires have a disproportionately higher ability to hire, essentially, to fund and make it possible for people to run to office. So if I were a citizen of Texas, then my vote doesn't count the same as somebody very wealthy, or corporations vote, or political parties vote. And you have to ask yourself, is that fair that somebody else's vote is worth, if we come in an equal, if somebody else's vote is worth more than mine or yours?
Thank you, Professor David Smith.
The metaverse is really an interesting thing because it is actually just an enhancement to really what we're doing on the internet today. And in some ways, some of the internet regulations directly apply up there out of the internet rules. And inside the internet rules, there's a pretty well-defined standard of what's there. But there's part of the metaverse that should be self-governing. And a bunch of the metaverse folks have come together and begin to set up foundations and others to address part of the self-governing part. And then because the metaverse is using the internet as a foundational infrastructure piece, a lot of the internet rules apply. But you begin to look at that, there's other places where the rules there are intersecting, such as the rules of intellectual property. If I'm in a virtual space, what happens to the rules of intellectual property? Finance is being conducted on the metaverse. Under which country do those finance rules apply? Do they apply? What happens when I go across multiple boundaries? And how do you drive the financial best practices that go with that? Also, you begin to look at it. One of the big things you see in the metaverse that is so critical for its success is we need to drive standards. And so far today, a lot of the development on the metaverse is using multiple standards and how it's beginning to be used with that. But you begin to see some other very interesting places with that. One of the interesting metaverses out there is called Sandbox. And it's probably the largest in terms today of actual monetary transactions. And it's really looking at the different ways to put the pieces together. Another big issue in metaverse that in the government side is what is the data privacy, what is the personal privacy, and what is the role of virtual fake people in a virtual environment. You know, we see in the general internet that there's things of deep fakes and other things like that. You're going to see the same thing in the metaverse and how those pieces are put together. There's also other places where you see issues with contract law, issue with things like social, like the investor fraud, land fraud, other things like that. And it's like one of my favorite metaverses are making a land sale end of this week. Now, how good is my title to a virtual piece of land in a virtual metaverse? And how legal is it? How do you enforce it? So those are just some of the issues that you have to put on the table when you look at governing the metaverse. So Sharif, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Patrick. Mr. Patrick, can you hear me? Mr. Philippi, yeah, sorry.
Great, thank you. Yeah, the metaverse as a way to experiment in these virtual worlds and to mimic some of the real world activities we want to experiment with. We have focused on the governance aspect. So online communities having some sort of say over how their communities run, or maybe there's a shared pot of resources in these virtual worlds. And how do we deal with things like reputation, right? You know, there's you know, a difference coming together in person, right? It's kind of hard to have two of you in person. But, you know, online we have civil attacks and ways of people trying to game that system. Like Eric was mentioning, maybe try to get more votes, trying to have more power within a community. So wrestling with those challenges of being online, of, you know, how do we protect our reputation? How do we gain reputation? How do we have trusted members that can come together to form consensus to move forward in some of these communities? So I see some of the easy access ways for new people to enter is that instead of some of these little games or fun games where you usually have to pay to use a game, some of these economies using blockchain technology are switching the narrative where they're offering for you to get paid to experiment with their game and experiment with governance. So I think it's a nice entry point where we can actually get paid to learn and to define some best management practices on how to get along. And there are quite a few different communities where you can find people that are passionate about the same interests, join these communities and kind of do a trial run in these virtual communities. But the friction and difficult part is bringing those best lessons back to your physical community, and I think that's a challenge we'll have in the upcoming years. Is if we succeed in the metaverse, do we all want to be in the metaverse all the time, right? And I would sense that the metaverse is there for us to bring some lessons and some learnings, especially in governance, back into the real life reality that we all live in.
Thank you, Mr. Jason.
Well, I was going to respond to all the points that were made. I made notes about the fundamental standards of it being a fundamentally different operating environment. I mean, to David Smith's point, it's taking the world by storm because it reduces the barrier to beginning a gathering. Doing a gathering in person, you need a venue. And if you're running a business, then you probably are leasing a venue or owning a venue, which they have complexities and costs. And comparatively, using the internet as your operating space, it really reduces that barrier. And then to Dwayne's point, it trades off to really unique types of challenges that groups need to be prepared for. And that is an evolving landscape so quickly that readiness is really like a routine. And you apply technique as a technology in a way as well. And to Eric's point, of course, even though we're fundamentally changing the operating environment of the gathering, for whatever reason it is, whether it's for productivity or for recreation, we have a way of taking all our old problems with us. A person moves away like, I'm going to change my world and move away and start a new, fresh slate. But when reality sets in, people find out that they took their old problems with them. And that our transition to metaverse and digital spaces and digital economy has that, right? Friedrich Nietzsche talked about will to power. We can't even help ourselves. There's this human impulse to, expand the domain a little bit and have another sandcastle, like another little bit of the sandbox, will to power. And the alignment of incentive is sort of a really interesting topic unto itself. Hopefully we can get back to that. But I'd like to move it around the table further, and those are my comments so far in this discussion.
Thank you. Professor David J. Kelly, you are AI expert, so how AI can help to develop this metaverse and this possible governing the metaverse? How does it work?
Well, I think, to kind of lay a framework for that discussion, I just want to say that the metaverse is still something we're defining. In a lot of ways, I look at it as kind of the same situation we had with the cloud. It's not like we talk about the cloud and as if there was some magic change when we started using the term. And in reality, it's really more a recognition of our mastery of the data center, and in a similar way, or data center automation. The metaverse is really another sort of fundamental shift in how we look at or name these kind of internet kind of environments. And with the metaverse, we need to understand that it's not, everyone's calling this environment the metaverse or that environment, or Facebook has decided they own the metaverse, and it's like declaring you own part of the internet. You can own an environment, and that's really where regulation I think is going to apply, is when you have these walled environments that are controlled by a single entity. But when you start talking about stuff driven, say
using blockchain technologies or it's distributed, it becomes very hard to regulate. Now, in terms of how you use AI, I mean, AI can be used for anything. And I think the kinds of stuff you'll see in terms of the metaverse is going to be everything from understanding, the behavior of what people do. And I think in immersive environments or metaverse-like environments, we think, the advertise or the stuff we see AI used for now is intrusive. You get to the level of quote unquote a metaverse or these full immersion environments, and the more time people spend in there, the more we can use AI to understand their behavior and make advertising that much more intrusive. And I don't mean intrusive in the sense of maybe I do. It's in the kinds of ways we can apply it to understand people's behavior. I think there is a need for in these individual communities to pay close attention. Already, I've been involved with projects involving AI in marketing space, for it's been at least 15 years. I remember doing a study for a particular retailer that I can't name that's in the super high tech space, where we talked about and did prototypes of this stuff working, where you could in real life see someone, they do some shopping in a store, and then in another store 50 miles away, just imagine this, you're walking by with your girlfriend, and then the front of the store transforms in some digital display is like, hey, remember that diamond necklace you bought for your wife 2 weeks ago? Well, now you can get blah 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 for $19.99, and you're totally screwed. It's this level of facial recognition. Oh, and another thing we tried for another retailer was having and I can't believe they actually tried this in a store with live customers, and it would freak people out, is you would go looking for a particular product. Can't really say that without giving away the retailer, and that would probably be bad. But there was signage in the store, like all the way around the whole inside of the store, right? And so say I can go looking at a particular product, right? And all of a sudden, the whole banner all the way around the whole store is like showcasing, well, hey, are you shopping for blah, 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 blah? Well, look at these highlighted products. And they thought that people wouldn't notice this. And it would like make people unnerved when they realized that what was on the thing was the stuff they were looking at. And just imagine the kind of stuff you can do in a full immersion environment. In the metaverse. And I think it'll be much easier to apply technologies like that in the metaverse, where the infrastructure and computing power to do that in real life in a brick and mortar store is a huge, expensive. It's hugely difficult. But with AI and the kinds of development tools we have now, and especially when we start talking about the use of blockchain related technology and all this other kind of stuff, there's amazing, scary things we could do. And the bar is really not that high. And that's where I think, governance and within these environments, while they won't be uniform, I mean, there's definitely going to be some kind of need, or people are just not going to want to be involved, especially once they start porting over, when you start talking about real money or which could very well be Bitcoin or Ethereum or something. But the more we engage with these metaverse sort of environments, the more that regulation is going to be important, because the greater the possibility of abuse of the existing technology, especially artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Professor Rob. You are expert for developing organizational strategy. We are discussing the governing the metaverse, how different corporations actually adapted this metaverse and make a better strategy, especially for their business development?
Well, the corporate use of the metaverse currently largely surrounds the Omniverse effort out of NVIDIA. In fact, they just last week announced the industrial metaverse in a joint effort with Siemens to roll it out for much of the rest of the world. It's used for simulation at scale. Much of the self-driving automobiles that are under development right now are being trained. I should say all of them are being trained in that we know of are being trained in that simulation in the Omniverse simulation, even though not all the guys are using NVIDIA's hardware. The advantage to using the metaverse as a simulation with probably the big plant that BMW just built being a good example is you can fully model the plant if you're building a factory, warehouse, or whatever, and then model the robotics in the plant and introduce random elements like people, and then see how they'll interact without putting any real people at risk. And when you're dealing with heavy equipment, it's really important that you take into account that people are kind of idiots and run heavy simulation to see what would happen to people, walking down a hallway with their face in their phone and not watching what's going on, and come into contact with a robotic arm or whatever. What's the process? How do you identify the threat? How do you stop the arm? How do you keep the person from being injured? Because factory injuries are far from uncommon, and in fact, my uncle lost a good chunk of his hand just because he raised his hand at one particular point in time and stuck it into a machine. Didn't realize it was over his head. Not the most brilliant move my family's ever made, but it's certainly a lesson learned. In simulation, you can run all of that, and the end result is you can determine where the safety issues are, where the inefficiencies are, and before the factory is even built. You've optimized the factory for whatever it is you're building. With autonomous cars, it means you can train the cars at machine speeds. So if you want to do 20 years of testing, you can do that in hours. Because the machines are running at machine speed, so time is irrelevant to them. And that allows you to do massive amounts of testing that otherwise would take you decades to do to assure the safety of the result. And you can do it all weather. A lot of the issues with regard to autonomous cars early on was the fact that they couldn't handle heavy rain, fog, snowstorms that they couldn't see. So what do you do? Do you pull them off the side of the road and freeze? What's the process? So through simulation, though, then you can determine which sensors work better than others. And now using a combination of LiDAR and cameras, the autonomous cars navigate better through rain, snow, or whatever weather conditions than people do, because they can see through the snow and rain far better than people can. And with a combination of cameras, including infrared cameras, they can see things real time, like children running to the side that a regular driver would miss. They create a full-on 3D rendering of the world around them, and are constantly now aware of anything that occurs in a 360-degree envelope, and that's what allows them to avoid a lot of the accidents that some of us enjoy watching on YouTube every other night. So not that I'm addicted or anything. So the metaverse, as it's being industrially provided, is focused on simulation and largely to assure both the efficiency and safety of upcoming facilities, whether they be an autonomous vehicle, tractor, truck, or car, or a full-on factory, as BMW has demonstrated, and now rolling out largely with partners with global service providers like Siemens through the rest of the world. Let's be clear, though, the metaverse, for the most part, is still very early on. We're in the first phases. As we look at the different phases of the metaverse, we have low orbit, double star, and big bang. We're really in the low orbit stage, which is where it's very fragmented, limited common standards. We do have them, but they're not widely adopted yet. Almost no common governance. Each instances being driven by whoever the technology is behind. So if you look at, say, two of the big ones, Omniverse by NVIDIA or the Metaverse effort by Meta, almost no connection between the two at the moment, but that'll change. And then we move to Double Star, where there's still no single metaverse. That's where we're evolving, and you have major players, much like it was in the early days of the internet with CompuServe and AOL. You have large, powerful instances, commonality between the instances, maybe some increasing common standards, and as I said, that's what we're evolving to. Lots of capital and mergers and acquisitions to drive the different entities together and create real-time solutions. And it starts looking really interesting and potentially very profitable. And then finally, you've got Big Bang. And Big Bang is where you end up with one metaverse. Now, it is not at all clear we're ever going to get to Big Bang. The underlying difficulty in creating an internet-like metaverse where you could seamlessly move between environments would make what we did with the internet extremely trivial. Particularly given the fact that these things are coming up as very different. Even the way that these things treat physics very differently from instance to instance, and whether or not you even need physics in a given metaverse is a question. For instance, the gaming metaverse may not need real physics. It just needs to be fun. Much of the games we play today don't have destructible landscapes, and you can do things like fly and the rest, which would kind of violate some of the laws of physics we have today. And it doesn't matter as long as the game is fun. So that eventual Big Bang, while it's an underlying concept, and it would mirror what happened with the internet, doesn't necessarily have to occur. We could stay gravitated in Double Star forever, much like we were in the early days of the computer revolution, where IBM just kind of owned the market. And you didn't have a lot of flexibility outside of IBM's environment. It could very well be that that's where the metaverse ends up. We'll see. It's going to depend on the willingness of the players to cooperate, and probably the strength of government to force some of the interoperability requirements that would be necessary to make that happen. And the government has played a role in that in the past. Different governments are acting to assure there's no excessive dominance. The internet with varying degrees of effectiveness, and the government in the past has opened up companies like Microsoft, who didn't want to interoperate, to becoming leaders in interoperation over time. So concepts and people change, and there's still a chance we could have the Big Bang. It just right now it appears to be quite a ways off with no clear path on how to get there.
Thank you, Professor Rob. Mr. Dan.
Thank you, Dr. Sharif, and thank you, Rob, and everybody for the thoughts. Very, very interesting to hear everything. I'm not sure exactly what to say. Maybe I'll keep it relatively short, but a couple of things that inspired me is, well, Rob was talking about the games being fun, and that's like what matters largely, that the metaverse is fun and so forth. And Jason was also talking about how metaverses provide an extra venue, or a much easier venue for people to meet and to coordinate and so forth. And Dwayne also mentioned about governing the metaverse too. And so I think that like the metaverse, there's a huge amount of potential in making amazing experiences, making fun games, making great meetings, coordinating to do fun things. And we need to learn how to cooperate and how to kind of yield this, like figure out how to do it in the best way, because they can go in so many different ways and there's so much amazing potential, and it's up to us to learn how to coordinate and cooperate and so forth. I'm not exactly sure if that answers the question or the prompt, but I'll leave it at that for now, and I'd be happy to share more, and looking forward to it. Everybody, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Patrick.
Very interesting discussion until now. Hello, everyone. So for me, what I am experiencing, because it's all about experiment, the metaverse for the moment, I see that we need a good layer of identity layer, I would say, because you bring your identity when you are going into the metaverse. You have an avatar. You can go in another metaverse with your same avatar. So that's multi. I would say it's metaverse. When you are entering a metaverse, you are also going in maybe into other metaverse. So you need to have a good identity. And also about the governance, I mean, we have to avoid incumbent advantages into this metaverse, avoid some power because more you have money or more you have maybe, let's say, reputation come into play, maybe some, let's say, power, bad use of power. So we have to be very careful with that. And about the technology currently, for example, company like Autodesk, AutoCAD, and all these software, they are using a lot the metaverse currently with the business intelligence and the data analytics, because that's the perfect example to go into the metaverse, because it's all about data, it's all about statistics, and that you can do very well if you are going into a metaverse with different employees working together, consultants, project manager, all working into the metaverse, into a virtual experience. And I am experiencing that myself as a consultant with my company, with Autodesk. So that's not just something that it is in development, that is used. And that's the only example that I am experiencing now. It's through BI, so business intelligence and data analytics, and some machine learning into the metaverse. So, and to come back to Duane with Alien World, Fractal, that we are experiencing with Dancing Joy, or based on the blockchain WAX, that is using the EOSIO protocol developed by Daniel Larimer at the base layer. So here it's more about doing something fun into the metaverse, a game, and with a governance model for the planets that are into this metaverse alien world. So here the goal is the planets. On another metaverse could be the goals could be the BI, the data analytics. So each metaverse has a goal, as a subject, let's say, oriented on a subject. But you can enter in a metaverse and go through other multiverse, other metaverse, by bringing your identity. So here, the identity for me, that's the very key point about the privacy and what you bring as data. Because when you go into the metaverse, you are bringing some data about you. So we have to be very careful on that. And I think the blockchain can help. We see that. And with more private transaction and not always public transaction.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Marshall, you are a climate change activist, and Asia Pacific, we are also have a lot of challenges for climate change. How actually metaverse can help to different corporations, especially in Asia Pacific, from the developing nations? What is your view?
Well, Sharif, after listening to everybody speaking about this topic, obviously there's a wide array of how people perceive what the metaverse is. We were hearing Rob, how he was using it or applying it to specific technologies such as EVs, electronic vehicles, and things like that. We were hearing Dan speak about it from another perspective. And we were hearing just now Patrick talking about using Autodesk, which is a system for designing products and services, or mostly products around the world. From my perspective, I think before I address the issue of sustainability, climate restoration, climate repair, which is our mission, I would like to sort of bring up the topic that, and I think it was mentioned by David Schumacher in our comments, is there a good historical example of regulating a novel environment such as the metaverse? And I think that's a great question. How much regulation is required? How much regulation do we need? How much regulation do we not want to have? That's always been the quandary of all technologies and innovations that are brought into the marketplace. And my background being twofold, clinical psychology approach, in other words, how people handle their own behaviors and behaviors amongst others, but at the same time, adoption of innovation technology, how do people adopt innovations in the marketplace, belongs to a whole realm of topics that address, I think, what David Smith and I have addressed in the past and older forums, of the adoption of innovations in a way that allows it for it to flourish, but at the same time cause no harm. The way I think I look at it is it's like a medical doctor. If nothing else, cause no harm. That's the Hippocratic Oath. I think we need a Hippocratic Oath for the metaverse. That's my opinion. And how it would be applied in the world of sustainability and climate restoration, climate repair is giving a classic example. It just happened while we're on this forum right now. A large corporation, PepsiCo, which is a large drink manufacturer that uses a lot of water, by the way, just issued a 1.7 billion US dollar green bond. Now, the problem with green bonds are that they are not really, they don't have a stringent taxonomy to follow. And I think that's where the metaverse can play a role, possibly, by bringing tools to the table that allow us to create taxonomies and watch these taxonomies be implemented on an ongoing basis, because we're not everywhere. We can't be everywhere. Right now, our team is addressing the Great Green Wall in Africa. That's a huge endeavor, and you can't be everywhere. And some of the countries of the Great Green Wall are not necessarily ready, willing, and able to participate because they have issues of transparency and criminality involved in it. So how do you deal with that? I think what the metaverse brings to it are tools that could probably be applied if they were structured properly. The question with all technology is you can use technology for good or for bad purposes. And from my perspective, I would prefer to see it used for the betterment of mankind, not for the subjugation of mankind. But that's my concern. My great concern is that we're bringing technologies that, I mean, we see it every day. I don't know about you folks, but I'm getting spammed. I'm getting blocked. I'm getting all sorts of things that are happening on an ongoing basis. And I have to acquire new tools to overcome these threats. So the question I have for the rest of the people out there is, how do you turn this a threat of a metaverse into an opportunity of metaverse and address the threat as well as the opportunity? I think regulation plays a role in that. I'm not a great proponent of regulation in the general sense. I think less regulation is better usually, but not always, especially in today's world where everything happens in nanoseconds and people can get blocked and hijacked and identities can be stolen. And if you want to deploy technology out there like ours that turns waste into resources, how do you do it in such a way that it's not being hijacked, especially in the metaverse? So I think that's the question I have for everybody out there. I think it can be used, should be used, but we need people such as the talent that's on this forum to be able to help us manage that process and get it into usage so that it's for the betterment of mankind, not for the detriment.
Thank you. Mr. Eric, as you know that World Talent Economy Forum, we are majorly focused on talents and how we can help them to grow the developing nations' economy. This is another objective for World Talent Economy Forum. How actually metaverse and this kind of technology can help the developing nations, corporations, government agencies, or academy. You can share your experience and view with our audience.
Well, I doubt that many of us can separate the internet with everything in life, business, friends. And it was the same thing. I doubt really, even if we don't know it, we can't separate separate relational databases, the cloud, mobile technology. We always look at this technology as, oh, here's this separate thing over here. But it really just comes down to people connecting and collaborating for fun and business security. That's what drives us. So there's a couple ways to look at it. One is you've got this idea of people doing what they do now, and they're just looking for better ways to do it. And Rob brought up some fantastic examples of doing that right now. Here's big people with resources and purpose, and they're just looking for a better way. And so don't even think about the metaverse. Think about the fact that we need simulation, we need models, we need connectivity, we need identities. That's just part that companies like Siemens and Tesla can do. And so that's the first question is, do you have an ongoing enterprise with some resources, direction that needs to get going? And that's kind of where we are now, is these separate groups trying to figure out how do we apply this in what we're doing now. And they could care less about the metaverse. What they care about is what can we do. And these ideas of persistent identities, decentralized finance, virtual reality, augmented reality, those are just things that could make things better. For example, the government is doing simulations to drastically reduce the time it takes to train people. That's all they care about. They don't care about the metaverse. They care about that we can put these people in an immersive environment, and they can take apart a piece of equipment, put it back together, and learn something that takes a long time. And so as these individual groups start doing that, there's how's that connectivity, which Rob also brought up. Microsoft is not talking to Apple, which is not talking to Meta. They don't really care. They just want to get their own things and their own customers until we see this branching out. On the other hand, here's the big challenge is whenever we have a new technology, we immediately try to turn it right back into what we already know. And so we're looking for this idea of the Maya, most advanced yet acceptable. Anything's new, we immediately have to make it look like it's not new or people get too upset. And by the way, if things are old, we get bored with it, so it has to be new and improved. So there's that balance between what we're acceptable doing. And so when you look at what's new, the next level is learning about what's there that can be applied to businesses or groups right now. And the biggest advancement is you can create something virtually today. You want to start your own clothing business? Right now, metaversal clothing is huge. It's not something you wear physically, but you could go out today. There's more money in metaversal clothes than are in real clothes at the moment. So you can actually start a virtual business. The other thing you can do is take your physical business and go virtual. I know Jason spends a lot of his time thinking just about how do you take a coffee shop and get it to go global. So that is, there are simple, very cost-effective things that you can do right now to either start a virtual business or to take a physical business and go virtual. And that's really where the future is. There are going to be some big virtual businesses. There are some big physical businesses that are going to have a virtual component. Some of these virtual businesses are going to go physical. For example, you start a virtual clothing line. Nothing says you can't sell those clothes in real life for people too. And they may even get popular. So that's the real key, is to realize that there are some traditional people pushing this. There's also lots of new people doing all kinds of innovative things every day, figuring out to do that. I think the biggest part is training people about these new metaversal things, what you need. We started something, we're starting with games because that's where the attention is. We started workshop.games with this idea of bringing people to actually say, oh, here's what I actually did, and here's how you can do it. Just because that training and information part is really lacking. There's lots of information all over the place. Patrick has information going out. You're talking about it here, but it's usually pretty disconnected. It's not very focused on, for example, how do you take that and put it in the simulation that Rob talked about? I don't know. Somebody knows. Some people know, but there's that lot of groups of people that know, but it's very difficult to get that down into a training environment. But there are avenues to do it. You can learn. The challenge is it's just hard for these developing countries to learn this stuff that's already there.
Totally, Eric.
Thank
And
you. Professor David Smith. Okay.
Sharif, great
I just
discussion.
want to
Go ahead, Patrick.
I just want to add what said Eric. Yeah, there are different views. There is the societal layer, the economical layer, and the technological layer. So we have a blockchain currently. That's the EOS mainnet, and there is the EOS.io protocol that is behind this EOS mainnet. That's developed by Daniel Larimer and Duane, Dan, myself, Eric. We are all into this. And that's the blockchain that is putting the infrastructure that is needed to have smart city, for example, in China, use the EOS.io protocol that is behind the EOS, the mainnet, and use Metaverse based on the EOS mainnet. Just to clarify here that it is already used. And also, that's the only blockchain that has short micro transaction of 0.5 seconds. And also you need a short finality. So the last irreversible block on the blockchain, so the short finality is also fast 0.5 seconds. So that's the only blockchain in the world currently that is able to solve this kind of problem needed as infrastructure for the metaverse and also for the Internet of Things, for the machine communicating between them. So IoT. So we speak a lot about political things, identity things. If you want to solve all those challenge, you need a good infrastructure, you need a good technology. So for that, the blockchain EOS currently, that's the only blockchain that is able to solve the societal, the economical, and the technological dimension or levels, how you want to name it, parallelly, okay? And also with private transaction, because if it is only public, that's not always good. You need to have some micro transactions that are totally private. So I am very involved into the technology of the things, on the side of the things, also interested a lot about the behavior of the people and to see those people when they are going into the metaverse, that they are behaving not differently if they would not into the metaverse. So we need a good check and balances, and that's we are developing currently with Fractally, with Edonios, all that with the EOS blockchain. Just to be clear here, that's used currently. That's not theory. That's used, and I invite everyone to follow the EOS development, the EOS mainnet, and to attend other meetings also about the EOS blockchain.
Thank you. Professor David Smith.
Sharif, great discussion across the whole people on the panel today. But I want to reinforce a couple of things that have been said. In the metaverse, it's really very, very important to look at the applications more than you look at the underlying technology. That the applications are what's going to drive the adoption of the metaverse. And many people believe the metaverse is going to be the next big thing on the digital community after mobile internet. And a lot of thoughts going there. But there are some still, like I said before, some challenges. There's a couple of regulatory actions pending against different metaverse providers who, for example, are not complying with laws like the Protection of the Minor Act, which is going to be necessary to use it with minors and others like that. You see other ones where the digital privacy is there. In UK, they're in the process of passing a new law on digital privacy that directly focuses on where they perceive the metaverse is going and in there. And also, if you think around the world today, there's so much laws about where data can reside. You know, the privacy laws are getting very rigid that if I'm doing something in Saudi Arabia, the data has to stay in Saudi Arabia. If I'm doing it other places, the data has to stay there. Well, guess what? Those rules apply to the metaverse as well. And so you've got to begin to put in place the regulatory environment and do it. And one other real challenge with the metaverse is because it's so pervasive as you look at its use of augmented reality and other like that, there's a lot of discussion in the regulatory environment about what happens with mental health in there. And there's a whole discussion thread going on what regulatory actions are needed to help protect not only people's privacy, but the mental health there. And like I said before, is what are the intellectual property laws? You know, can I steal other people's digital property and move it into the metaverse? And is it okay there where it's not in other digital assets? And the rules have to just be there. And you know, for example, the EU Commission is looking at doing a co-created intellectual property law that is trying to solve some of the perceived challenges going forward in the metaverse, and you're going to see those. And like I said, the financial side is still very much there. But to me, the metaverse, the train has left the station. And you see so many. Rob's talked about a couple of the major ones here, but you see also folks like Alibaba getting into it. Decentraland, which is one of the larger metaverses. Others like PEX and others are really getting in there. And so it's going to take a combination of the metaverse community coming together and setting up governance standards, the existing internet governance associations working to that, and really a blending across the global regulatory environment to not only do that, but see if you can synchronize them together. But the metaverse has to comply with a lot of the existing contractual law, financial law, privacy, intellectual property, security rules. And it has to do it consistently or it's going to slow the growth rate where it's headed in. And it's already beginning to move pretty good. But since the topic is governance of the metaverse, those really are the ones that have to be packaged together to make this successful in the long run. And it's going to affect the large countries and even the very small countries, because the impacts are the same as you look at to the end users and the companies and the institutions. So thank you, Sharif.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Mr. Philippi.
Just want to speak, what Marshall was saying, how do you have our real world problems, how can the metaverse facilitate some direct action? And we've been working with DACs, which are decentralized autonomous communities. And you do take personal responsibility for some of these tough questions like identity, a constitution, so a group, determining the laws and the rules they want to follow. And I see these games in easy access of having a safe place where people are meeting up in this virtual world, that they're no longer satisfied with just a game that's just a game to have fun, and that those games can lead to information and knowledge, and especially these games based on a blockchain and taking economics and say all these different aspects of how we would complete and facilitate public goods. I see more and more communities coming up trying to solve these problems themselves without trying to reach out to government or the structures that already exist. So I sense that the convergence between these communities that are connecting and getting together and coming towards a common purpose. I think the challenge and the exciting part there is connecting them to real world action. And in that sense, that if we can onboard people easily and they feel safe and they're coming towards some common goals, I think this does facilitate, what's called a meeting space and a safe space that some of these online actions can actually bring in the people that can influence, whether it's marketing or real world action to help things like our climate challenge or our environmental challenges. So we feel divided, and that there's so many issues that it's my little effort into what I'm doing might not help the whole. And I've seen some of these games and communities starting to ignite the passion from people, realizing that collectively coming together in this new space, we can make some positive change. So I think that's the challenge of moving, maybe instead of it's maybe not speaking about how big business is utilizing this for productivity, but for the individual communities, it's another way to organize. And it's interesting that we have these decentralized tools that are helping facilitate us come to consensus and agreement on how to move forward. So if nothing else, if it can prove to be a virtual tool to help bring us together and cause real change, I'm very motivated to spend a lot of time to facilitate that end goal within these small groups that might be seeming like we're just trying to have fun and games, but they're really games to help us facilitate real world action. So the collision of those two, meaningful work and meaningful real world action, I've seen a lot of the online tools in the metaverse starting to facilitate that.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Jason, what's your concluding remarks for today's session?
Well, I think I'm going to send it back to David before we're all out of time, because all these topics, the one thing I wanted to mention was us and our strong identity tool, leaving a breadcrumb trail in our interactions in these gatherings. They're valuable to ourselves and to others, because that data is the data Patrick is speaking about for analytics and business intelligence. But I want to get it back to David Kelly to talk about ads again, with all the rest of it in. The value of the venue even speaks to that too. If you noticed, when you go to places, there are posters up. The more people are there, the more posters, right? And that it's a massive coming together aspect of it all. So, if I may, I'll just wrap it on that. I'm going to follow up with everybody with something written.
Thank you. Mr. David J. Kelly, what's your concluding remarks for today's session?
Well, I mean, to me, this is such a massive topic, the governing the metaverse. We haven't even defined what the metaverse is really, because everyone has their own. It's just kind of a high level word describing lots of different isolated technologies that are all built on top of the internet, or which is itself built on top of underlying protocols and so forth. Governing it is a big challenge, especially. Well, I don't even know if you can talk about governing it entirely, except in the same way that we do the internet. You can only really apply these rules in a given community or a given context. I think blockchain technologies, whether it's EOS or Ethereum or any other number of blockchains that support smart contracts, really provides a lot of infrastructure for things like identity management or asset management in the metaverse or different things like that. But it's going to be difficult to come up with a standard unless it's specific to a specific context. And specific to my research, into artificial intelligence, that's another just massively open book. Like with the systems we're talking about, it'll be interesting to put those self-contained AI systems that are and that's another thing. When talking about AI, most people think of what we talk about AI is not what would be AI to me. So I don't mean machine learning, but when we start talking about cognitive architectures or semi-self-aware software systems that can develop their own goals and make their own decisions and do their own things as applied to the metaverse, I think will start to create, in specific contexts, a lot more. I guess you could start talking about digital biodiversity, and I think I'm personally interested in seeing what these agents in the metaverse that are not human controlled, where it kind of goes. And I think there'll be a lot of interest around that. But I also think there'll probably need to be regulation within the context of specific environments, or there's going to be a lot of problems. But to me, I think it's just immensely interesting and a topic we could rehash for the next 6 hours and not even hit a drop in the bucket of the amount of potential things we could talk about, So with that, if anyone has questions specific to AI, I'd love to address those. And nice to talk to everyone again.
Thank you, Professor David Jicali. Professor Rob, what's your concluding remarks?
Well, the metaverse isn't a thing yet. It is a lot of things. It's a general category that encompasses a set of virtual worlds that may at some time come together, but may also not. The evolution of the metaverse is not yet clear, and it's not clear that it even has to come together in order to function. The two areas that are viable right now are multi-person gaming, which have kind of always been the metaverse before we called it a metaverse, and on the industrial side, large-scale simulation for autonomous cars, factories, buildings, and concepts. And in the architectural space, if you're building a home or an office, you can use the metaverse tools today to fully explore whatever it is you're building, long before you hire a contractor or go for approvals. And it does save a substantial amount of money. Again, before we were calling it the metaverse, we were doing things like scanning plans to turn them into 3D explorable models that allowed us, when we were building or designing our last house, to fully explore it before we decided on doing anything further. And that would have substantially, if we'd actually built it, that would have substantially reduced the building cost. When it comes to governance, the issues with the metaverse are going to a certain extent, mirror the problems we have in real life. We're going to have fraud. We're going to have abuse. We're going to have discrimination. It doesn't preclude bad behavior, I guess is what I'm saying. And while the metaverse is distributed and isolated in kind of walled gardens, governance will initially fall within the companies. And you've seen how well that's played out in places like Facebook and Twitter, which is to say unevenly and often not well. The governments tend to have a hard time dealing with a new technology until it's been around for a while and the technology is understood by the people writing the laws. And we aren't even there yet with the internet. So the internet, we've had the internet for decades. So the hope that we're going to have our hands around the metaverse anytime soon is probably unfounded, given our past history. And it'll be initially up to the companies that are creating these things to learn from their predecessors and recognize that if they don't get their arms around governance early on, that they may either be put out of business or be highly regulated in painful ways that they may no longer want to work in the environment if they're not careful. So the firms that are building this stuff need to be proactive. They need to anticipate where government's likely going to want them to go and get there to a reasonable position first, so that the efforts by government are not prioritized because what you don't want is you don't want the government stepping in before they understand a technology to regulate it, because then they'll kill it. So getting there elegantly as opposed to inelegantly is incredibly important. And then for those folks that are on the environmental side, the effort to really watch closely is Earth 2. That effort was designed specifically to address the climate crisis and create large-scale, accurate predictions of weather events, and then come up with better ways to mitigate the underlying problems, and rank those efforts both by effectiveness and cost, so that then the world can come together with remedies that might actually address the problem. As those of us that are currently on the West Coast and experiencing what it's like to live in an oven, are noticing this week, is it's going to be very helpful, at least to have some better technologies to mitigate the problem, because there's a good chunk of California on fire again, and those of us in Oregon are kind of looking at California like they're our near-term future if we're not extremely careful. So the big promise, I think, to a great extent on the metaverse is going to be our ability to understand problems better and more deeply, and come up with more effective, cost-effective ways to mitigate them, and ways to argue for a better approach. So, for instance, to deal with climate change, moving to electric cars probably wasn't one of the first things we should have done. We should have focused on some other things first, because we've got huge infrastructure problems that we have not even approached to address with electric cars. And that's going to create secondary and collateral damage problems that we should have been mitigating, that we aren't, and probably won't seek to address until at least the second half of the decade. And after we've started experiencing some of the adverse effects of having to spin up a whole crap ton of unhealthy power generating plants to cover the peak loads that we are having difficulty covering even without the electric cars today. So in the end, it's about understanding the problems better and coming forward with low risk, high reward methods to mitigate them without creating massive amounts of collateral consequential damages. And that's where the promise of the metaverse is. Even before we get to the point of having a common metaverse, being able to use the metaverse to better understand the world we live in is going to be one of the major impacts of this technology, and our hope for a better future.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dan, what's your concluding remarks for today's session?
Thank you, Dr. Sharif, and thank you everybody for the fascinating conversation. I've really mostly just enjoyed listening to everybody's perspective, and then I'm looking forward, as I think David said, and I think many other people hinted, this is a huge topic, and so there's only so much we can get to in an hour, and there's a lot more to discuss, and I'm looking forward to discussing more. And I'll also just say that I think Dwayne mentioned it and Patrick mentioned it as well. I think that the fractal governance systems that we've been talking about over the past couple episodes of this show, and also that we've been doing with the Alien Worlds fractal and with the Genesis fractal that Dan Larimer was pioneering and so forth, I feel like that it was profoundly helpful for figuring out how to govern the metaverse, how to govern the metaverse and how to cooperate in the metaverse and how to make the metaverse as successful as possible, because we're going to need to use new tools and new methods of organization to figure out how to make sense of all these questions and how to figure out the best way forward and empower leaders to make the best decisions going forward. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm looking forward to discussing more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick.
Oh, yeah, just happy to be here and to share with everyone the talk about this metaverse. We have no answer directly, and that's good. And because it's all about experiment, and we learn every week more, new data, new metrics, at all levels, so societal, economical, technological, and that's what interests me, and why I am here, and because we need to do the things very well crafted and at all levels. So, but when we speak of metaverse, it's so huge and so bright that we have to sometimes maybe focus on a subject to discuss. Otherwise, we can discuss maybe in loop And but I am very happy with this discussion today, and thank you everyone.
Thank you, everyone. We're just finishing our 597 episode. So hopefully, through this dialogue, we can make more contributions for developing nations. I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible with your government agencies, corporation, and academy. And I request all of our speakers also support our projects. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's session. Thank you. Bye bye, and take care.
Thank you very much.